So C says, smartphones and tablets have less processing power than notebooks. They also have a dedicated keyboard. Okay. So this is they also do not have a dedicated keyboard. Okay. So this is important. This is true. This statement is 100% true. If you think of a notebook, when we talk about notebooks, we talk about the fact that they are very similar to laptops. They do have some sort of differences, but we'll also look at that in a few lessons to come. But smartphones and tablets 150% have less processing power than they do notebooks. And we also know that it's true that they do not have a dedicated keyboard. Okay, perfect. Then we get D. Information is defined as raw, unorganized numbers, singles, or facts. Is this correct? No, it's not. We know that information is processed data. So what is the definition of data? We know that data is raw, unprocessed facts. So D is false. Data can be defined as these raw, unprocessed numbers, signals, or facts. Then E says supercomputers are devices designed for a single purpose. This is 150% true. These supercomputers are designed for some sort of specific purpose. We spoke about them yesterday. Perfect. Then number 7 looked something like this. Okay, and this is where I want to see. Let's get some answers going over here. Okay, it says fill in the missing information at A, B, C, or D. So what would the answer for A be over here? Okay, I'm not going to ask you to type the whole long description. So let's get the chat going with B and C. What would the answer for the description of memory in the second step? Okay, this is the data is stored in the computer's temporary short-term storage called memory or RAM. What possible answer could we have for B over here? Okay, let's look at C. Processing in the third step of computing, and the computer follows the instructions programmed into it and manipulates the data in some way. What could we say for C? Okay, well, maybe it's just a bit early. Okay, let's actually check. So the first one is B is, A is getting both instructions. Look at you go. You actually typed the description for me. Poppy, you are amazing. Okay, the fact that you typed that out for me, awesome. Okay, and that's exactly. So the way of getting both instructions into the computer, look at this, okay? It's the computer receives some data instructions in the computer code, such as the original text message. Mine is just in a lot more words, but yours is just as right, okay? Literally, can you see in the description it says memory in the second step, processing in the second step? Can you see I even put it in there for you? So you just needed to know that for the process, it was memory and processing, okay? Then if we talk about an output, this is where the computer supplies the newly manipulated information. And then this information is displayed on the screen in storage, okay? This is the processed data that will be stored on the device. Okay, so that's what I asked you to look at yesterday. Okay, we should all be good with that. So cool. So now let's actually start with today's new work. So today I want to look at types of hardware. And this is then essentially computer hardware refers to the physical parts of a computer and the related devices. So the internal hardware parts of a computer are often referred to as the components, whereas the external hardware devices are usually called the peripherals. And these are devices that are outside the case and the system. unit, okay? These are connected to the computer via ports, such as, let's say for an example, a USB port. These can also be examined using some sort of structure as the computer model. So if we think of input, output, storage, or communication, right? That's also devices that we refer to as peripherals. So essentially, we are going to look at peripheral devices today. And I want to look at input devices versus output devices. So we're going to start with input devices. So this is just a device that allows the computer to interact directly with itself, okay? These are devices that give data and instructions. These are devices, like I said, they're keyboards, pointing devices like a mouse, could be touch screens, game controllers. There are so many input devices used by computers. I can't possibly look at all of them in a 45-minute lesson. So we're just going to look at the most common ones that come up. So let's start with a keyboard. Okay, so let's look at a keyboard. I do just want to give you a heads up, okay? In the theory textbook, they speak about the advantages and disadvantages of these devices. What I'd like to do is we're just going to talk about these devices in general, okay? But please just take some time to maybe read the distinguished advantages and disadvantages. I may not explicitly say this is why it's an advantage or this is why it's a disadvantage. I'm purely just going to be talking about these devices in general and how we interact with them. Perfect. So your average keyboard, okay, is called a QWERTY, okay? Can anyone tell me why an average keyboard is called that, okay? It's called a QWERTY keyboard. Can anyone tell me why? Yes, let's go. Someone raise their hand. I know you know this, guys. It's because it's the order of the first couple of keys. Look at that. Okay, so in case you didn't know, okay, if you look down at your keyboard, if you see if we just look at the letters that come up, right? Can you see that Q, W, E, R, T, Y are the first 6 letters at the top row of your keys? And that is why we refer to that as a QWERTY keyboard, okay? And it's literally, like I said, it's the first row of the letters. If you press those 6, that is what is the name of the keyboard. But we also know that these keys can be pressed simultaneously, so almost like special keys. So those are your alts, your controls, your commands, your shifts, depending on what type of keyboard you're using. And those allow us to also use shortcuts. So touch screen displays can display a keyboard on the screen for entering some sort of text. You also get projected keyboards. So those are called virtual keyboards. And these project keys onto a surface using LED or laser, okay? And these keyboards use sensors to almost see the keys that you are pressing, okay? And we also know keyboards connect using a USB port or wirelessly, and we can use Bluetooth keyboards, okay? And like I've said here, computers and smartphones make use of touchscreen keyboards, but we touched on that yesterday. Perfect. So next we're going to look at a mouse. It's the most common pointing device, okay? And generally speaking, most computers are sold with a keyboard and a mouse. But by definition, or to give you some sort of more formal definition, a mouse is just a device that you move around on a surface, okay? And a sensor on the screen moves in sync with that device. So for an example, I have a Bluetooth device, you could have a wired device. Or we're going to look at later, you could have something called a trackpad. And that also forms part of some sort of pointing device that manipulates based on sensors in order to move on the screen wherever you want to go. So let's say, for an example, you want to now move your mouse on the screen. You can point at items on the screen. You can click, right click, double click, drag, scroll. There are many different options with how we interact with this device, depending on the purpose of whatever you want to use your mouse for. Perfect. Then we're going to look at touch screens. So these are usually found on tablets and smartphones, but some computers also have touch screens, okay? Some of the newer computers have touch screens. A lot of the computers that have the all-in-one box. So a lot of the newer computers come with a screen and a box in one. You don't have to have the computer screen and then the box, it just comes in one, and most of those are touch screen. So instead of having a cursor or a mouse, you directly touch the element on the screen you want to interact with, okay? So this ensures that you can control the gestures that you are making. For an example, if you want to zoom in or out on a touch screen, you can pinch 2 fingers in and out. You could also swipe or you can scroll, okay? So essentially we can pinch, we can expand, we can drag, and we can touch. So there are many different options for gestures on what we can do in order to interact with these touch screens that we have every day. But most touchscreen devices, okay, don't have touch pads. So a device is generally made with one or the other. So a touch pad, okay, or sensitive pads, okay, if you have a laptop, right, most laptops come with touch pads, and they're generally square in size, and this is used by moving your fingers across that little sensor. Okay, you move it like a mouse pointer on the screen. The surface responds to the electronic connectivity of the human finger, and it moves the pointer on the screen just as you would move a mouse. Okay, and they use the same sort of technology as you would for a touch screen that is used on smartphones and tablets. Okay, so that's something that I thought that was very interesting. Then, keeping in the touchscreen and touchpad section, we are going to look at pointing devices. Okay, so basically when we refer to a pointing device, this is an interactive pen, okay? And it allows us to almost interact the same way as if we were writing on a pen and paper. So a tablet pen allows you to draw or paint in precise paper on what we would call digital paper, okay? And that digital paper you can then view on your screen or on your tablet. Okay, this technology uses a pen or something more familiar. We call it a stylus. And it's used for, like I said, we use it for more precise and accuracy more than if we wanted to use our finger. I mean, if any of you have tablets and you have these styluses or pens, it's a lot easier to write with one of those than trying to write with your finger all the time over all of that detail. Okay, cool. Then we're going to look at something called, we're going to look at gamer controllers. We're going to look at cameras, microphones, and these are other input devices. So gamer controllers are used as input devices, and they are designed specifically for games. I'm sure. Oh, wait, sorry, we have a question. Ma'am, doesn't a mouse and a keyboard, okay. So 150%. So someone asked on the chat that we have, Doesn't a mouse and a keyboard fall under pointing devices? So 150% a mouse would fall under a pointing device because we're physically making use of some sort of movement. But in saying that, we just need to remember that a keyboard does not actually allow us to point at anything. A keyboard only allows us to type in physical keys. Okay, so a keyboard is not a pointing device, but a mouse is 150% a pointing device. Cool. So let's go back to gamer controllers. I can almost guarantee you that about 80% of you have used a gamer controller in the last 6 weeks, okay? They have directional inputs as well as action buttons. They are linked to specific actions inside a game. So for an example, if you are playing, let's say, Call of Duty, and you want to shoot or if you want to jump, you need to know that the different buttons on that controller represent different actions in every game. If you want to drive a car in, let's say, Formula One, that might be different to how you would need to drive a car in, let's say, Need for Speed, or how you would accelerate, or how you would carry on the movement in a race. Okay, so not all devices, not all gamer controllers work the same. If you think of Xbox versus PlayStation, they have different buttons on them that make use of different actions. If we look at cameras, so cameras allow us to capture images. We spoke about cameras yesterday, but they also used for making video calls. So cameras is not always necessarily just to capture images. We can also, like we are doing now, although you can't see me and I'm not making use of my camera, okay? It also allows you to participate in video calls or record meetings from your computer, okay? So it's not always just to capture some sort of image. We also just need to know that luckily most cameras and many video cameras are digital. So they capture and store pictures as readable files. So this allows us to easily transfer these files to the computer. We can either connect them using Bluetooth or we connect them using a cable. So then if we look at something called your microphones, microphones allow you to record sounds and interact with your computer using a voice. So the only reason you can hear me is because I have some sort of microphone connected. We can then also look at scanners. So scanners are really important. So scanners allow you to scan pictures of pages or photos, contacts, stuff like that, directly onto your computer. Most printers nowadays have almost a 2 or 3-in-1 capability where you can scan and print. Not all of them, only some. Okay, and these are often packed with optical character recognition. Okay, so that's OCR, and this is some sort of software. And what this software does is it converts the text on a picture, converts the text on your image into a picture, okay, that can maybe be used in a word processing application later on. So let's say, for an example, you have a document that's printed. If you scan that in, you can actually copy and paste off of that document. It may not necessarily always come up as a picture, but that's only if that scanner has OCR software on it. Okay, so please don't forget that. Then we look at something called biometric devices. So these devices read data presented to the computer and compare some sort of data with that from saved data, okay? Biometric devices, can anyone tell me what an example we could use? So when I talk about a biometric device, what is an example of these type of devices? what could we use when we think of biometrics? Eye scanner, 100%, okay? If we think of iris and retina scanners, that is that every eye has a unique sense of buildup, okay? Just like our fingerprints. So fingerprint scanners are also biometric devices, okay? Although they're not very phone on fingerprints, look at you go. So say for instance, the first one that comes to mind for me is an iPhone. So they have that little circle at the bottom, okay? That allows you to have a fingerprint scanner, okay? Another biometric is a face scanner. So to be able to unlock your phone with your face, okay? Every person has individual characteristics. And what actually happens is it creates almost these sensor points and triggers. And where let's say for an example, my nose stops based on where my eye starts, based on where the indent on, let's say, my chin, those all line up differently. And that is how biometric devices work. It is so interesting. I could probably do a 45-minute lesson just on biometric devices. I love it. It's such an interesting concept. And then we get something called data collection devices. Can anyone think of an example of a data collection device? Can anyone give me an actual example for a data collection device? A barcode scanner. Poppy, you are on a roll today. Clearly, this sunlight is doing you amazing job, okay? A barcode scanner, because essentially you are literally taking your barcode scanner and you're scanning this barcode, and the barcode is an actual representation of some sort of information. So it could give you the item's name, it can give you the item's price, can give you different types of information directly from that barcode. Okay, so that's very cool. So those are our input devices. I'll go through those again. So input devices are things like your keyboard, your pointing devices. Your pointing devices include mouse, your touch screens, your touchpads, the pen tablets, stuff like that. And then the other input devices that we've just discussed over here. So let's take a look at output devices. Okay, wait, before we do that, here's some interesting words that I think you should take note of. So if we look at eraser pointer, okay, if we look at resistance touch screens, and we look at capacitive touch screens, so dependent on what touch screen you have, it actually has different types of capabilities. So let's look at the best example. When Samsung first released their tablets, I'm sure some of you realized, but not all of them allowed you to use a stylus. Okay, 150% you could write with your finger, but you may not have been able to actually have a stylus, let's say like a Samsung Note has. Samsung Notes have stylus that come with the phone. So dependent on the type of touchscreen we get, so they have different characteristics. Okay, so that's important to know. Then we get infrared touchscreens, okay? And then we get SAW technology. Okay, this is in the textbook. I'm using the grade 10 IT textbook from Siabula. So just familiarize yourselves with these new words. But essentially, the differences between these touchscreens is basically dependent on what the device is and what we need to get out of that device. Cool. So let's look at some of these output devices. So output devices are just as important, sure, that I was not winning with that word. So output devices are just as important as your input devices, although there is a lot less variety of output devices versus input devices. That's important to know. And this is because of the nature of human senses. So think about that. Think about how we interact with the world around us. I can touch, I can see, I can speak. And we have to use our senses to interact. Whereas when we get something out, it might not necessarily have to rely on all the human senses that we have. Cool. So basically, the devices that I'm going to be looking at now, we're going to look at monitors, we're going to look at printers, and we're going to look at data projectors and speakers. Oh, I'm also going to touch on headphones because headphones link very closely to speakers. Perfect. So let's look at a monitor. Okay, so what is important about a monitor? So all computer software is built around visual representation of data. Therefore, one of the most important output devices is the monitor, the screen, the physical thing that allows us to see what that data is, okay? To check the quality of a monitor, we have to look at some important characteristics. So this is the number of pixels, something like the screen size, your refresh rate, your contrast ratio, your aspect ratio, and your brightness. So when we talk about something like a number of pixels, so we also talk about something called sorry, I thought someone was chatting to me. Okay, sorry. So when we talk about the number of pixels, we're actually talking about something called does someone know? What do we also refer to when we talk about the number of pixels? There's one specific word for that. They go hand in hand. Resolution. It's clearly a great day for IT. You guys are so on the ball today. Okay, so we also talk about the resolution of these monitors or your screen. Okay, so each pixel can be seen as a tiny dot of color on the monitor. So that's why if we talk about something like a pixelated game, a pixelated game is created with every little square, right? Okay, can someone give me an example of a pixelated game? Everyone's played it. Well, I hope. Pac-Man, 100%. So essentially what has happened is it's created all these little squares of different colors. Nowadays, we have better pixelated aspects in the sense that if you look at my screen now, it's very curved, it's very clear, well, we hope, okay? And that type of stuff. Whereas in the past, we may have only had, let's say, 720 by 460, we now get HD, which can almost be 3,800 by 2,100. And that is something we call as 4K. Okay, 4K comes from the fact that it's 3,800, so it's almost 4,000, so that's why it's 4K. Cool. So then I want to talk about, if we talk about the resolution of a picture or the resolution of a screen, I'm sure the most popular one that we talk about at the moment is the 1920 by the 1080. Okay, that's a very popular monitor resolution. But does anyone know which one of those numbers is referred to across and which one of those numbers is referred to down? So I'm talking about, I'm going to add it in the chat. So we're talking about 1920 by 1080. Okay. So if we have a screen resolution, the first one is horizontal. Okay. So if we talk about horizontal, are we talking about across or are we talking about down? We are talking about across, 100%. So when we're talking about the 1920, we're talking about the resolution. It is moving from left to right, 150%. So when we're talking about the 1080, we're talking about down 100%. So, but what does this actually mean? It means that there are 1,920 little blocks running from left to right. And there are 1,080 little pixels running from top to bottom. So the more pixels we have, the clearer the screen is going to be. We obviously know, actually maybe, let's discuss this quickly. When we give the size of a monitor, does anyone know how we measure it? When we talk about screen size? Let's see. So like if you have a TV, okay, in inches, 150%, okay? But when I talk about screen size, I mean, so say for instance, it's in 52 inches from the top left to the bottom right. So 100%, we measure it diagonally. So we go from one corner to the other corner. That might not be something that you know. So if there's anything you've learned from today's lesson, it is that we measure screen size diagonally. Okay, cool. So I'm not really going to speak about the others. The others are quite self-explanatory, but take a moment to read them through in the textbook. So let's look at printers. Printers are probably the most important things in our everyday lives, maybe not necessarily at the moment, but if we think of our textbook that we want to have printed, or if we think of the work we want to study from. Okay, so a laser printer works by melting toner onto the paper. They're good for quality printers. They're great for general purpose printing. They're faster than inkjets, and they're relatively cheaper to run. So the actual ink that is required is cheaper. If we think of an inkjet printer, so this sprays dots of ink onto the paper. So they're slower than laser printers, and they're more expensive to run, but they're often the best option for printing quality photos. Okay, so that's just a nice idea of how to almost, if you need something printed and you don't have a printer at home, and you have 3 different printer shops to pick from, pick the printer shop that has the correct type of printer for whatever printing you'd like to do. Okay. So that's sort of the 3 main types of printers we get. We get laser printers, we get inkjet, and we get dot matrix. So if we think of a dot matrix printer, it's probably the oldest type of printer that we get. And this is very old technology that works by striking pins onto paper through inked ribbons, okay? So can any of you think of a practical example of that? Can anyone think of an example of where dot matrix printers are still used? I'm going to be so impressed if someone knows this. In Poppy. Honestly, you are mind-blowing today. Invoices, 150%. So I don't know if you've ever had those almost carbon invoices. It has that funny feeling pieces of paper. So that is where we still use invoices and bills. So there's carbon copies, like I just said. So we keep a duplicate copy of that invoice when we use dot matrix printers. Perfect. Okay. Then we get other types of printers. I'd maybe spend some time familiarizing myself with that also, just in the sense that we seem to be running out of a bit of time. But I don't want to spend too much time on printers. You just needed to know that the 3 main types is laser printers, inkjets, and dot matrix. Something that is very interesting is that 3D printers essentially, basically work the same way as normal printers. It's a really fun concept, and I'll maybe touch on 3D printers a little bit tomorrow. Cool. Then we're going to look at something called data projectors. So these use a bright light to project the content displayed on the computer monitor onto some sort of surface. So basically, when we talk about data projectors, we talk about two types of cabling. We talk about a VGA and an HDMI. Sorry, can you just tell me what's the difference between an HDMI and a VGA cable? Does anyone know what the difference would be between a VGA and an HDMI? VGA is better. Ooh, okay. I have a bone to pick with that. Just a tiny one. Okay, when would we use a VGA versus an HDMI? Boom. Alonso, 150%. So VGA only displays the picture. VGA has no audio capabilities. So when that wire was originally made, it was made for devices that had external speakers. It was never for devices that had internal speakers. But if you think of your laptop, you don't want to have to carry around bulky speakers to be able to present something. So nowadays, when we use an HDMI cable, number one, presents better quality, as well as the fact that it has audio. But there's a major but here. There are still people that believe that VGA is better. And purely for the fact that some VGA cables that are made nowadays do produce a higher quality than HDMI, picture-wise, but like we say, there's no sound, so you have to rely on your own speakers. Okay, cool. So if we look at speakers, let's maybe touch on speakers. What about display ports? Okay, so let's keep in mind that when we talk about ports and when we just talk about display ports, we must actually look at every one of them for different purposes. So a lot of the time, it's not that HDMI is better than VGA. HDMI is more appropriate, let's say, for a laptop versus a desktop computer. Or let's say, if we have a very big lecture hall, even if we have an HDMI, is that going to be relevant? No, we're still going to need external speakers. So this is where we need to understand, okay, and we're going to look at this later on. So I'm not answering your question. We just running out of time a little bit, sorry. So I'll touch on the cables and what they do and their purposes tomorrow. Okay, but if we just look at headphones and speakers just quickly, so sound is produced using speakers or headphones, and the quality of the sound is dependent on two things, okay? So I don't have homework for you for today, okay? And tomorrow we're going to be carrying on with these output devices, okay? I'm going to wrap up my lesson for today. I don't want to go over time. So you don't have homework specifically, but I want you to investigate what those two things are that we rely on when we talk about quality of sound in a computer. Okay, so that's your homework. I'm not giving you any other homework. It's an amazing Tuesday. Let's carry on, okay? No homework. Poppy, you didn't have the homework for yesterday. So now you're going on no homework Friday. Yesterday you tried and no homework today. You are living your best life, guys. Okay, so thank you, grade 10. That's all I'm going to present for today. Have a lovely